Hi everybody, welcome to Simply Scuba. So, when you mention scuba diving to the uninitiated, people that don't scuba dive, we really need to come up with a name for people like that. Don't know. Let us know down in the comments below. But when you say scuba diving and when you very first sort of start out, there will be one main image that you have in your head, and that's a single cylinder open circuit diving kind of setup. But as you spend more time in the water, you start to change the way that you dive, and the equipment that you invest in can usually be one of the biggest catalysts for changes in the way that you dive. Most little things don't have too much effect on you. You can change your fins and your diving won't change that much. A new mask isn't going to make that much to a difference of sort of how you dive. But there are some pieces of kit that can make a big difference in the way that you dive. So let's take a look at some of them and 5 products that can change the way that you dive. The first one is a dive computer. So I was probably one of the very last few divers to learn to dive recreationally on diving tables. Years and years ago, before dive computers existed, you dived by tables, or actually before that, before tables even existed, you just dived. But then dive tables came out, but dive tables were pretty rigid. So we used to plan dives based on square dive profiles. You'd get to your maximum depth, you'd stay there for X minutes, and then you would surface. You'd then work out your pressure group and your surface interval so that you can plan your next dive. If you wanted to dive multiple depths on a single dive, there was a multi-level dive course for that. Dive computers have changed the way that we dive so that we spend less time with pen and paper working out the complicated maths and dive times and depths, and we just let our dive computers pretty much work it all out. Modern computers are pretty smart. I mean, we have computers today that can alert you when it's best to switch gases. Others, they can use your heart rate and your skin temperature to adjust your dive profile based on how hard you're working. You can connect a wireless transmitter to your regulator so your computer can not only alert you when your tank pressure drops to a certain level, but the computer can also work out, based on your breathing rate, your depth and your air supply, how long that gas will last in minutes. So dive computers are great. A dive computer gives you a certain amount of freedom in the water. So if you need to change your dive profile on the fly, it doesn't matter. They take all of the paperwork out of diving and mean that you can pretty much strap one on and jump in the water and you should be fine. This is the only one on the list that has already become fairly mainstream, and it's actually unusual to find a diver without a dive computer nowadays, but they have definitely changed the way that we dive. If you've been following us for any length of time, you're probably aware that I dive a long hose primary donate setup. Unlike the off-the-shelf regulator configuration with a short hose on your primary and a 90 centimeter octo for your buddy, this gives you very little wiggle room if something should go wrong. There's not much space between you and the diver that's just run out of air. Whereas diving a long hose primary donate setup means that you have 2 meters of hose to play with and you both have room to literally breathe. The main reason for this is for confined spaces. That's why long hose primary donate kind of sort of started, but long hose can change the way that you dive. The first way is routing all of that hose. When you first start out, you don't think too much on your hose routing, you just connect the right hose to the right place and you're done. But with long hose setups, you need to keep it trim so that you're gonna want something on your hip to sort of hook that long hose to, under around your neck as well, so you're keeping that hose in the right place at all times. Your alternate is now going to be on a short hose, but instead of being on an octo clip on your hip, it's going to be in a necklace under your chin. And when you're donating to a buddy, you're not just handing over your octo, you're actually taking a breath, taking your regulator out, looping it over your head, and then handing it to your buddy. you then switch to your alternate. So when you start to change your hoses on your regulator, you're really starting to change the way that you'll dive. You're starting to customize your gear to suit you and your needs, and that's really going to be quite a big change because you're really starting to take your diving a bit more seriously. Mpora is an online magazine that is all about inspiring adventure, whether adventure involves sliding around on a snowy mountain, pulling yourself up a rock climbing wall, riding your bike through wooded trails, or surfing barrels down at the beach, and yes, of course, exploring the wonderful underwater world that we all love and enjoy. Mpora is a website that has got you covered. Mpora features interviews, previews, reviews, the regular news, everything that you need to keep clued up on the big outdoor issues. It's got the lot, so definitely check out Mpora after you watch this. Diving in a wetsuit is fine and all, but for long dives and cold water, dry suits are really the way to go, but they definitely change the way that you dive. Wetsuit diving is pretty easy. You throw it on, you jump in the water trickles down the back of your neck, and that's about it. The most technical thing that happens to your wetsuit during a dive is that it gets a little bit thinner at depth. A dry suit has multiple valves and seals that you need to maintain during your dive, so it does change the way that you dive in the water. The first thing that a dry suit changes is that you need to use your inflator and your dump valves on your dry suit to maintain insulation and buoyancy. Your buoyancy can shift during a dive inside your dry suit, so you need to be aware of how much gas is inside your suit and where it is as well. You don't want that gas to migrate too far in the wrong direction, so you need to dive a more horizontal position. If you suddenly turn upright, then all of that buoyancy shifts up to your shoulders, and that gas will probably vent out of your shoulder, and then you're gonna sink. You also need to turn your neck off when you're diving in a dry suit. So many new dry suit divers complain about leaking neck seals, but it's usually caused by them looking around on a dive. If you have an airtight seal around your neck, you want that section to move as little as possible. Suddenly looking up or turning your head is a great way to let water into your dry suit. So you need to start looking with your shoulders so the neck seal moves as little as possible. Most diving involves a mask to cover your eyes and nose and a regulator in your mouth, but you can merge those two into one full face mask. So full face masks have plenty of pros and cons, but they do change the way you dive in a few ways. The first way is that you can now breathe through your nose, and you don't have to bite down on a mouthpiece for the whole dive, so there's a new sense of freedom to breathe a bit more naturally as if you're on the surface. With your nose and your mouth free, you can also talk underwater. You do need underwater communications, but you can actually talk to people, to other divers in the water and to the surface if you have the right communications. Full face masks cover your entire face, so they keep your face nice and warm, but they change the way that you get in and out of the water. At the end of the dive, it's pretty easy with a normal regulator to just spit that out, hand the BCD up, and then you climb out of the water. But with a full face mask, it's attached to your face like a face hugger, so when you take that off, you literally take everything off, eyes included. So you have a couple choices when you're getting out onto a rib. You can whip it all off and just cope with water splashing on your face, or you can fit a quick disconnect to the hose and leave the mask on, so that you can leave the mask on and take your BCD off and hand that up. This leaves you with the problem of breathing, unfortunately, because you've just disconnected your air supply. So you need to fit a surface air valve to actually let the air in so you can breathe. The same problem occurs if you need to bail out for any reason underwater. Underwater, if you need to switch to an alternate air source, you need to do it blind. You need to actually pull your regulator and mask off at the same time, secure the octo, and then you can breathe, but you still need to fit your backup mask. So it does change a little bit of diving if you do need to switch air sources under the water when you're diving on a full face mask. Rebreathers are probably one of the biggest changes for a scuba diver. The first way it changes you is that you need to start rearranging your personal finances to be able to afford one, but they also change the way that you act in the water as well. Now, the weirdest thing at first is that your breathing underwater does not affect your buoyancy in any way. So you can inhale and exhale as much as you like, but you're just gonna sit there neutrally buoyant. It doesn't affect your buoyancy. Actually, breathing on a rebreather feels different too. It's a bit more like breathing in and out of a plastic bag because there's no like rush of pressure behind it like an open circuit forcing air down your neck. You're just breathing the same kind of lungful of sort of gas over and over again, but it's not under any kind of pressure. The only thing with this is that you need to be flat in the water again on a rebreather because the air that you're breathing isn't pressurized. It always wants to go to the highest point. So if you suddenly shift to a head up position, an entire lungful of gas suddenly wants to occupy your mouth. The opposite, head down, you need to suck that air through the loop to actually get it through to your lungs. So diving a loop means that you need to be a bit more disciplined with your mouthpiece as well, and your airways. You can't just take your mouthpiece out of your mouth, especially under the water. You actually need to close the loop first before you can take your mouthpiece out so that water doesn't get in. So you have to be much more disciplined and you can't just willy-nilly spit that out. You also want to be diving with a bailout tank on a rebreather. If something fails, you want to be able to switch to good old-fashioned open circuit. Open circuit isn't the most efficient, but it's reliable. So you need to start diving with a side-mounted stage tank as well. You're also going to be spending the first 5 minutes or so of your dive actually sat down on a bench on the side of the boat just to pre-breathe. Your rebreather has a whole bunch of tests that it needs to go through, and you need to be able to sort of make sure that it's set up correctly. If you suddenly find a fault, you want to actually find that fault in the first 5 minutes actually on board the boat instead of the first 5 minutes under the water. You don't want to find a fault down there. But what ultimately made you change the way that you dive? Was it a dry suit so that you could dive in colder waters, or was it something like a transmitter that meant that you could see how much air you had left on your dive computer? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share with all of your scuba diving friends, and of course subscribe to the Simply Scuba channel. Thank you for watching and safe diving.